Hello and welcome to the Focal Points with John Leake and Dr. Peter McCullough. I'm your host today, John Leake. I'm with one of my favorite analysts about all things, Chris Martenson. We joined Chris in this kind of epic battle to figure out what the hell was going on with the whole COVID-19 lunatic pandemic response. But Chris is a real master at studying all kinds of physical phenomena in the world. Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself and we'll jump right in.
Oh, sure. Thanks, and thanks for the invite, and welcome to everybody who's listening to this. Chris Martenson. My background is as a scientist. I went through Duke Medical School for the first 2 years, and the next two in the lab, and then I spent 3 more years as a lab jock doing my postdoc work. So I like science, I like data, and then I found out that maybe that field wasn't quite right for me. So I got an MBA, went off and did corporate finance for a while. Found out me and corporations don't get along super well either. So for the past 25 years, I've been my own man to having a blog, and I analyze things. John, that's what I do. I analyzed the great financial crisis and the housing bubble when that was going on. Whenever anything big breaks like COVID, I sort of just dive in and figure it out. And of course, COVID was a reasonable fit because I do have a medical, sort of a biological background. And so it was easy for me to sort of spot what was true and what wasn't. And sometimes I get credited with being a truth teller, but it's wrong. I'm a bullshit detector. And if I can chisel away enough of the BS, I can get to something a little bit closer to the truth. And that's sort of how I approach everything. I've analyzed the Butler shooting, big questions remaining there, the Kirk shooting, just because I love my physics. I love doing audio analysis. I love finding out what the actual evidence says. And the only thing you need to know about me is that if the evidence changes, so do I.
Well, I have enjoyed all of your analyses of all of these things, and I thank you for joining me today. One of the things that has been really kind of bouncing around in my head for the last 3 or 4 months is what are we to make of this proposition that on the one hand, we're told by President Trump and his cronies in Washington, the Strait of Hormuz is irrelevant. The world's supply and pricing will not be affected by that. He says that some of the time, but then the other time, it's this equally vehement, the Strait of Hormuz must be opened or else, all hell will, the fire of hell will break loose on the Iranians. And, when I hear him, this kind of schizophrenic, like, is the Strait and the energy that's coming out of the Persian Gulf, is that important to world energy and pricing, or is it not? So that's the question. And when I listen to Trump, do you remember that funny movie in the 1980s, Fast Times at Ridgemont High?
Of course. Some
Remember when
Spicoli.
remember when Spicoli wrecked a linebacker's Pontiac Firebird? Do you remember that scene?
Remind me.
Well, Spicoli and there's this kind of terrifying semi-pro football player that plays for Ridgemont, and he's like this wrecking machine on the field. And because he's a semi-pro, he has this really cool car that presumably the high school alumni have given him so that he'll play for Ridgemont. And Spicoli and his little brother take the car out for a spin and they total it. They just Spicoli is driving. He wrecks the car. Anyway, the little kid says, "Oh my God, my brother, he's going to lose his mind. He's going to kill us. He's going to lose his mind. He's going to kill us." And Spicoli says, "Well, make up your mind, dude. Is he going to kill us or is he going to lose his mind?" So, which is it with Trump? And that's what I'm here to ask you. I mean, is the ongoing combat disruption, insurance not paying for tankers, the whole mess in the Strait of Hormuz, is that really an impact on global energy or is it not? And you're the guy that was talking about it on Tucker Carlson. So where do we stand today?
It's a hot mess. So Trump is absolutely wrong about a lot of things. And of course, that's his style. He's kind of famous for it. And I don't really take much of what he says at face value anymore. He's clearly just making stuff up all the time. Iran wants a deal. Iran wants a deal, and he's clear we need the deal. And here's why: the global economy runs on energy, right? And if you look at the total situation that we have in the world right now, right before the world was producing about 86 million barrels a day of what is just classified as crude oil. They slap some other stuff on top and say we were consuming 103 million barrels a day. That other stuff is not oil. It's butane, it's pentane, it's ethane, it's stuff like that. Oil. Oil is what we run the world economy on. Obviously, if you go outside, you see jets. Hey, that's kerosene or jet fuel. You see trucks. Hey, it's mostly diesel. You see ships. It's this stuff called bunker fuel. That comes from crude oil. Okay. So how much crude oil are we producing today as a world? Well, it's about, after the closure of what just happened with the Houthis in the Red Sea. We can get into that if you want, but we're down about 15 million barrels a day. Ouch, right? Plus some other distillates and refined products because of Russia. We're missing a lot of energy. Okay. Why is that important? Because there's a straight line relationship between how big your economy is and how much oil you're consuming. And we can just, it's every country sits on this dotted line with very little variance. So, okay, if the world is missing 15 million barrels a day now, the question is, well, how much smaller was the world economy when it was last consuming naturally 15 million barrels a day less? It takes us back to 2009 now, because it used to be 2011, but the Red Sea just dialed this up further. 2009, and the world economy was about 40% smaller then than today. Now, it's obviously hasn't cratered by 40%. So what's happening? Well, what's happening is we're eating into two big stockpiles. One's called floating oil. It's out there on ships. There's usually about 1 billion barrels just out there on all these ships going hither and yon. We've really collapsed that pretty hard. We've eaten through that. And also onshore inventories, which could be strategic, could be commercial, but you add them together, you say that's how much oil is kind of in storage for a country. And every country's just been eating into those as well. So that, I think, explains why Trump's a little bit getting desperate to get the strait reopened, because you don't want to sail into tank bottoms around, if you just do that, meaning there's only so much you can suck out of a tank before you get to, there's nothing left. It's called the suction line, literally like nothing left, right? You're drawing air. And he needs to have this whole thing resolved before we get to that suction line. And the problem is that Iran holds all the cards. And so now Trump is caught in a really difficult situation. He's going to have to take an L one way or the other. He said recently, I don't want to be remembered as Herbert Hoover. I'm like, no, don't worry about it, dude. You're going to actually resurrect and buff up his image. You're going to, you wish you could be Herbert Hoover. Trump will become a verb in the future to describe future presidents, wow, you really trumped that badly, be terrible. So he doesn't want that on the one hand, but on the other hand, if we don't get a resumption of flows through those Red Sea and Persian Gulf Straits, we're facing an absolute economic catastrophe that will be entirely pinned back on the United States and Israel, because of the two parties that decided this was a good idea.
All right, so Chris, I can already see the comments to this video from some of my Wall Street buddies who are big Trump fans. There is this cult of personality around Trump that, whatever he does, he's, Chris Martenson might have studied this stuff for, the last 40 years, but Trump is playing, what is it, 5D chess? He sees things that
John, it's so amazing. We have to call it quantum chess. It's superpositional at all points in time.
So that the howls of protest, they'll say, well, if that's the case, why aren't the oil futures markets reflecting that? I mean, the commodities guys are clever enough to see around the corner, just as Mr. Martenson can. So that's where you and Tucker came up with, I think, is such a fun theory straight, out of the film The Matrix. And I don't know about you, but I'm beginning to think that The Matrix, the film, was prophetic. I'm kind of beginning to think it's for real.
I think they need to move it from fiction to documentary. That's all.
Right. Well, so, I mean, could you put a finer point? Well, first state, what is the idea that you presented on Tucker Carlson in the event that some of my viewers didn't see it?
Well, it's simply this. Our markets have been heavily manipulated for a long time, and they are now narrative machines. They're there to convey things to the broader world. Like, if, Trump said it directly himself, he's like, I was told that oil was going to 300 and stocks would tank. And look, stock market's at an all-time new high, and oil's only 70, which is him saying, the markets approve of what I'm doing, therefore it's a good thing. So that's the narrative structure around markets. If they're going up, it's good. If they're going down, it's bad. Since they're going up, we must be doing good things. It's that simple. And I could give you hundreds of headlines where you just see this reinforced daily on, CNBC or Yahoo Finance or wherever. So
But let me ask you this though, because I know that you understand commodities trading better than I do. Why doesn't some gazillionaire, monster Godzilla player come into the market and say, all of these morons are betting on oil being, $86 2 months out. I'm going to take down just a monster contract of, 80 bucks 2 months out. I mean, I would think that this this rejection of reality on the futures curve would just create such an enormous possibility for somebody to take down oil at 80 bucks and then sell it for 300 2 months from now. Now, I may not understand this, but maybe like how like can you can you address that scenario that I'm just kind of making up in my head? Am I wrong about that?
Well, because you're thinking about it in a very honest way. This is the same way I think about it, which is that, oh, here's this market. If I can find the trend that's wrong and take the bet against that, I'll win. But if you become a monster player, you understand that actually that's not the game. The game is once you're a big player, you're in Game of Thrones territory. You're either winning or dying, right? So let's go back to 1980. The Hunt brothers saw a structural asymmetry in the silver markets. They said, ha ha, all these people are short and we can corner this market. And they went long, they went big. And then the CFTC came along and said, oh, we're going to have to change the rules real quick here. This is awful that you guys figured out that there's an asymmetry and are going to make money off of it because it harms a lot of the people we care about, like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the market. They came out with a rule one day that said, oh, from this day forward, you can't initiate a buy order for silver, only sell. What happens when you can only sell? The price gets crushed. They got wiped out. So if you're a really big player, you got to understand who you're up against here. You have to understand that if you really were in a position to win like that, they'll change the rules. And you have to factor that into your calculations of how you're going to play that game. So there's that. It's very clear what's happening right now. We're seeing overt manipulation, right? Even the Financial Times had this big article in April, and they said all the top commodity traders in oil were like, we don't know who this big player is who suddenly stepped in and just started selling and selling and selling. And we've seen that happen over and over again, right? I've put out lots of pieces where almost every day I can show you somewhere between 1:30 in the morning and 4 in the morning, the thinnest traded market hours, where someone steps in and sells up to millions of barrels of oil within a single 1 minute window. This little tiny, tiny chunk of time, boom, just crushes the bid. And here's how this works in practice. So I'm a trader, I'm a human, and I watch that and I go, okay, I'm up against the house. The house wants oil to go lower. So you quickly figure out that's never a winning position. They say don't fight City Hall. Yeah, never fight the Fed, and certainly don't ever fight the US Treasury. Don't, right? So you learn that rule pretty quick. And then the second thing is that to Tucker's point, almost all trading right now is actually conducted by computers. It's upwards of 90+% in certain markets like equities, right? It's just computers. They're algorithms. They're blinking lights on a server rack. The algorithms have rules that they follow. Each one is coded up and tuned a little differently. A lot of them are what are called momentum algorithms. They don't care. Like if an asteroid is coming and going to hit the Earth in 10 seconds, they'll still be buying something, right? And so what they care about is the direction of things. And so it's actually kind of almost child's play to get things moving in a specific direction in these paper markets. So that's the game. They're using that to say, hey, paper oil, oil's only 70, 75, 80, whatever it is right now. It's probably 85-ish at the time of this recording. But when you look at the products, because you don't consume oil, I don't either. I consume refined oil, right? Gasoline, diesel, jet fuel. On that basis, just this morning, diesel per barrel cost now has a more than 100% premium over the cost of a barrel of oil. So if oil's 85, diesel is 86 more than that per barrel. That's called the crack spread. We're watching crack spreads just blow out because we're desperately short finished product. This is what's starting to bite. And we're just watching this exquisitely bizarre tension between the so-called headline price of oil and what we're actually having to pay at the pump or at the jet fueling station for the finished product. That's telling the real story. But here's the prediction. when this game is finally over, because about 50 times to one time, the oil market is just speculators playing with each other. You sell a futures contract, I buy a futures contract, we settle up at the end of the period for cash, that's it. But that still creates what's called volume in the marketplace, oil's trading, 1,000 barrels a contract. On the small end of that, like about 2% of the actual market, maybe 5% on some days, is an actual, you're an oil producing company in the Permian Basin. I'm a refinery. I need it. You have it. So but a little bit of it is actually that. Some of those contracts are sitting out there now in September, October, November, December, where those actual producers are waiting for delivery. And they're going to do what's called stand for delivery. Prediction, we're going to find that whoever's been doing all this paper selling is not going to have the actual oil to deliver against that, right? They may have to try and sell it pull it from the SPR. There's quite a bit there. We're going to watch carefully, but there's not enough crude supply right now for that. And that means, and by the way, the United States is totally exposed to the world oil markets. Yes, we have domestic oil, but we pay the same price as everybody else in the world, minus some margin for shipping, right? So that's it. It's a world market, still is. We're not insulated. We're not energy independent in the sense that we pay what everybody else pays, less the cost of shipping.
Well, so it is totally fascinating to think of the futures market. And to me, it seems perfectly plausible being manipulated. I also love the Hunt story. I'm from Dallas, Texas. I know members of the Hunt family. I mean, that is kind of, a moment of what did FDR say about the bombing of Pearl Harbor? A day that shall live in infamy when the COMEX guys just changed the rules. I mean, the other side of that is you kind of wonder why those Hunt boys didn't see that might be coming. I mean, there are these local Texas guys, there are these guys up in New York and in Chicago. It seems like their flank was left exposed. But anyway, all of this manipulation and rule changing, it seems perfectly plausible to me. So if Trump, with his sort of schizophrenic proclamations, to open the strait or not to open the strait or to bomb the Iranians to the Stone Age or to negotiate, if he doesn't resolve this, can you paint a conservative picture? I mean, I was thinking the Arab oil embargo of 1974. I mean, could you see long lines at pumps? Could you see flights being canceled because jet fuel is scarce or too expensive? Well, what do you, it's probably prudent to make a conservative prediction so that nobody comes back and says, "Oh, you were all doom and gloom and it was unfounded." What is a reasonable conservative scenario for how this really bites us?
So reasonable conservative is there's still 4 to 8 months, depending on how desperately low you want to go in your reserves of oil, right? Here in the US, but also in Japan, in China. And so Europe's in terrible shape. We can get to Europe in a minute. They're actually really hosed here. But so what's going to happen is we're going to get to some moment where you're going to start to see what we call resource hoarding, right? There's going to be some country that's actually a net exporter right now that says, we can't do this anymore. So this just happened, Russia, right? Big giant. They were the number 2 producer and exporter of not just oil, but finished products. And then, mysteriously, March 1st is the decapitation strike for Iran. And then March 2nd is when Ukraine really upped its attacks against all the Russian oil infrastructure, oil depots, refineries, the whole 9 yards. And so those 2 insults, each of them is like the worst we've ever seen from an energy standpoint, way worse than the oil embargo of 73, 74. So with that, Russia is now a net importer of diesel, right? Which is, it's like waking up and reading that Iowa had to import corn. It's just like this most bizarre thing because it's a giant country, huge resources, and that's all they do is pull oil out of the ground, sell it in raw form, and also refine it and sell the refined products. Now they're also short on gasoline and other things. So this has a huge impact right now. So Russia not doing that, what we're seeing is these refined products are actually getting drawn down really hard. In the United States, our refineries are working flat out. We can't have any refinery mishaps. They're running about 98% capacity. Normally they run at about 90, 92. And the remaining capacity is because they have to get shut down for maintenance. There's a lot of, it's a very complicated set of pipes and things, and they need scrubbing and maintenance and all that. So we're not maintaining anything. We're just running flat out. And even with that, John, diesel, inventories are just cratering right now. Gasoline, lowest it's been in, I don't know how many decades, just in terms of how much we have produced and sitting in tanks. So that's actually what drives higher prices going forward. And at some point between here and I would suggest by December, but I'm kind of really I'm squinting hard at October, is the line where we won't hit physical suction lines, but countries are going to go, uh-oh, this is not resolved. I don't see any end to this. And they're going to get that little scared moment of saying, oh, I'm going to have to hoard stuff. I'm going to buy as much as I can. Japan's not going to just be sitting there going, well, we'll just let our stocks run down because we're sure this will end soon and we'll be able to refill our stockpiles soon. Europe made that exact decision very consciously with their natural gas stores. They said, well, it's LNG is really expensive right now, and we can't really, afford it. Right? You know what? We're just going to hold off because it'll be cheaper later, just as soon as this war is over and Qatar starts shipping natural gas again. I mean, I don't know. Can I do this? Can I just do this? Show you something?
Yeah, do all you want.
Yeah. So this is Europe's natural gas in storage, and they're at the bottom end of what's called a 5-year range, but this is in percentages. So they're sitting at about 55% full, when normal for this time of year would be up here around 75%. This is a big deal. They're missing a huge amount. And if they come into this, below, Europe is facing a very, very cold winter at this point. They're going to probably have to go through gas rationing and triage because there's no chance of them at this point of refilling from any meaningful place. And of course, they also just kind of shrugged and did this when somebody blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, right? So Europe actually got completely hosed. We blew up the Nord Stream, and they said, "Oh, don't worry, buddy, we got all the LNG you need," but we don't, because this is Qatar's LNG exports. They were about 20% of world exports, and they went from doing about 200,000 tons, 250,000 tons per day to zero. It's just there's not a chance in the world that the United States has enough spare capacity to re-up that. We can't. There's nothing we can do.
So this brings the blowing up of Nord Stream. Yeah, I thought it was so funny. To me, that was like the ultimate expression of our mainstream media being composed exclusively of total morons. Like
Yes.
literally just shit for brains is your qualification for being hired for a mainstream newsroom. Biden himself said we'll end it. I mean, he's on at a press conference with the German Chancellor Scholz. It's German property. The German Chancellor said, and he says we'll end Nord Stream. And then the thing gets blown up, and it's like, oh, the Russians must have done it. It's just we could have a whole nother conversation on what the hell is wrong with our reporting agencies in this. Anyway, well, don't get me started.
That'll fit perfectly into my hypothesis. I know I'm detecting BS again, chisel away at it. They're like, the Baltic Sea must have been the Russians snuck in there. Dude, this thing's a bathtub. It's not that deep, and it's coated with sonobuoys and detection systems. There's not a chance. We know where every single thing is in there at all moments in time. 100%, right? It's too important. And the second thing was, we all saw those pictures of the gas bubbling up, and they didn't go and take water samples, because if you take water samples, you can find out what kind of explosive was used. And they have these little taggants that go into these things so that you can tell exactly which factory those explosives came from. That's just standard. That's what you do, right?
That's great. The other thing that you and I could have a big laugh about is all of these years, Bill Gates has been telling us that we need to slaughter the world's cow herds because they produce too much methane.
Mm-hmm.
And then our own government gangster agencies blow up Nord Stream. I think it released something like 580 million metric tons of methane into the atmosphere. I mean, it's the largest human caused methane incident of pollution of all time by like 5x. So, this is the world in which we live. It's governed by obviously total lunatics. But it does seem to me that the political side of the lunacy does recognize that the American people can sort of remain pretty ignorant about the world and everything is great as long as it's not really affecting immediately materially affecting them economically. The moment prices start to really go up and really hurt people, that's when they wake up. I think it was Aristotle or one of the old Greek guys that said, we learn principally through the experience of pain.
Hmm.
It's not a nice cocktail atmosphere and suddenly we learn valuable lessons. It's when we're suffering that we learn. So how would you hazard a guess about how the fallout of this politically? I mean, like, where is this going?
Well, this is going to much, much, much higher prices. The only way it could not for the U.S. citizens is if Trump sort of nationalizes the oil and says, "Well, we're not exporting anymore" or something. I don't know what that does because like that shatters every contract we have with the world, and who's going to hold the dollar at that point, and that could create the spinoff from that would be huge. It's kind of like in February of 22 when the Biden administration froze Russia's sovereign reserves, proving they weren't reserves or sovereign. And next thing you know, like gold's taking off, the BRICS are getting together, they're de-dollarizing, the yuan is now being used for an enormous amount of international trade. And so it had huge consequences. They were just, oh, we just want to punish Russia, but oh my God, they didn't think through the second order effects. But here's what it looks like. Okay. So this is natural gas prices in Asia here. So in Japan and Korea, 100% increase in natural gas, right? Both countries are 100% importers too, and they're principally using natural gas as a feedstock for industrial processes and also to make electricity. Okay, this is going to have a huge impact. 100% increase. In Europe, diesel in Europe up 65% since the start of the conflict, right? Heating oil up 56. Actually, this is old, so this is actually up in my neck of the woods up here. It's up about 90% now. Heating oil. It's going to have a huge impact on people. People's houses use heating oil to heat here a lot. So all of this, these are enormous impacts. We're going to see a lot of inflation. The Federal Reserve is back to printing again. They've been printing up like crazy. It's not QE. It's not QE. It's not QE. It's reserve balance management. But they're printing up lots of money, and our government is deficit spending officially at 2.2 trillion. But if you look at how much debt actually has gone on the balance sheet in the last 12 months, that number is 3.5 trillion. I always go with what lands on the balance sheet, not what they tell me with their funny accounting. So money's being printed like crazy, and somehow here's what happens. We're going to get an extraordinary explosion of inflation at some point. And that's if and only if we don't get to, like, you asked for best case. Worst case is we just decide we can't tolerate Iran having any wins in this story, and we'd go and we attack them hard. Maybe we try and, I don't know, put boots on the ground. We do something like that. And Iran makes good on its threat and says, if you do that, we're going to dial in and take out these remaining Gulf infrastructure assets for energy. If they do that, now the world is suffering through it might, for all intents and purposes, John, is going to be a permanent loss of oil and gas. They could fix it in the next 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years, depending on what gets damaged and how badly. But we can't go a full year of this. Every tank bottom hits suction line. Now the world has to figure out how to survive on the same amount of oil we did in 2009, when our economy was 40% smaller. Local mileage will vary, but this leads to immediate economic catastrophe, especially for over leveraged countries like Japan, like the United States, like a lot of Europe. We have a lot of debt. And then the second thing, this also has to be talked about. We're not just missing oil, and we're not just missing oil products like naphtha and all that stuff. We're missing those too. We're missing the derivative products like the sulfur that is principally comes from as a byproduct of refining sour oil, and we use that sulfur. Sulfuric acid is probably the most underappreciated and the most important industrial product out there because we use it for everything from leaching, heap leaching, base metals, copper, zinc, stuff like that, to making, most importantly, phosphate fertilizers, right? So you use sulfuric acid, you pour it on phosphate rock, and then you end up with, you get your DAP, diammonium phosphate, and you get all that stuff. We're already facing crisis levels of phosphate production right now. And next year, that's not going on the fields. And then we have a really bad harvest. And now we're actually talking famines and things like that, right? But that's kind of a next year thing. So this has to be resolved. If this is going to carry on for another year, if Trump does something wicked stupid and, follows Lindsey Graham's dying wish and just really goes insane in Iran. Iran obviously is not defanged. They have options. They have very accurate missiles, and they could make good on their threat. If they do that, that's when we're going to have to all understand that anything we thought we knew about how the world works is now gone. Our economy doesn't function. Financial markets are broken. Everything, the entire underpinning of our financial markets is simply this. The future is going to be larger than the present. We're always putting more debt into them. We always have more money going into it. And you can sort of make good with that, make peace with that. If you say, well, but the economy will be 3% larger. Our economy will be materially 10, 20, 30, 40% smaller in the future. And literally the entire substrate of how our financial system and monetary systems currently operate does not operate in reverse. That's called the Great Financial Crisis. It's terrible.
Okay, so two questions, and I think if there's anyone that could figure this out, it's probably you. So there's a longstanding perception that the gangster oligarchy that rules the world it is not interested in losing a ton of dough. I mean, they have this massive capex spending on all of their AI things, and I mean, if we start with the proposition that this is totally self-destructive, self-sabotaging, irrational behavior, what are we to make of our gangster oligarchy that's got a gazillion dollars invested across all asset classes, has now got a big thing about AI, and they've dumped a gazillion dollars of capex spending in these stupid data centers, all of this. Like, what are those guys thinking, and why aren't they putting pressure on Trump to just stop the nonsense in the Persian Gulf? I mean, and I know you don't know the answer, but do you have a theory?
I do have a theory. In science, the theory of everything. It's the TOE. So here's my big toe. Ready? Um, Before the steam engine was invented, slavery was really widespread because we're humans and we'd rather have something else do our work for us. It's fine. So it was practiced all over the world, right? But then we got the steam engine and it was like, oh, you know what? We don't need the power anymore, the muscle power, human and animal. What do we do now? Oh, that's when fractional reserve debt-based money came into being, because when you can get somebody in debt, John, they're their own slave master, right? They're like, I'm sick today. I got to go to work because, I got this mortgage, right? You're your own driver in this whole thing. And most people don't understand this, but that debt-based money system, that money is just literally made out of thin air. It's not like this real tangible thing like we're taught, because it's tangible to me. If I run out of it and end up under a bridge, that's a tangible event. But for the banking system, for the elites, like, they just make this stuff out of thin air in unlimited quantities. Now, the problem is when they broke the tether in August 15th, 1971, now we're free to just make as much as we want. And we have a math problem, and they know it as well as I know it, which is that there are too many claims on the future. They'll never be paid back. They can't be paid back. So there's all this debt outstanding, which is your debt, your liability, but it's their asset. And you're right. I'm sure they're going, okay, I'd hate to lose all this power and control, because that's what money really represents to them, right? That's what they care about. Ta-da, data centers. Because, we need to get this new AI because, we got to beat China and all that hokey stuff. No, this is the next layer of the system of control, because they know that the dollar system is dying. Maybe not this year, maybe not in 10 years, but it's clearly, it's broken. It's a math problem. So I think that's what this whole thing is about, is making that next shift to the next layer of control. And this one's really subtle, because if you've studied it like I have, and I know you have, fifth generation warfare its whole job is to make you doubt that you know anything at all, make you even doubt yourself. And so that's what's been happening just comprehensively. And so when we look at the oil markets, how could futures traders be so stupid? I'm like, well, it's probably some combination of unlimited money dumping shorts into the market because they want to, plus their narrative shaping machinery working overtime on people's psychologies and doing all of that. We watched this happen during COVID, right? And they broke some people. There's still people out there riding solo in cars with masks on, right? There's still people out there, still doctors out there saying, oh, the COVID vaccine saved lives. We have to give it to 6-month-olds. Like, it's completely divorced from reality, but they hold it as an entrenched belief system. When you can control what people believe, that is the headwaters of the Nile in this story. And so I think that's my big theory of everything. And that's why you see this just almost chaotic mad scramble rush to slap data centers in as fast as possible. It's like, against every known thing that like they don't care about capex. If you notice, they don't care about burning through all their free cash flows. These companies, John, are literally betting everything on green on the roulette wheel. And you're like, that's strange. Did they all lose their brains at the same time? Or is there something bigger running? And for me, there's something bigger running.
Well, okay, so that brings up the next thing. So the other thing, I can already hear the howls of my Wall Street Trump adulation crowd. They're going to say, "Well, the America has proven reserves. If maybe this is just a big push to just say to hell with our dependency on Middle East, Persian Gulf energy, and let's just go hard." Well, let's go hard in our new vassal of Ecuador. No, not Ecuador. What am I saying? Venezuela.
Venezuela.
Let's go
Mhm.
hard. Let's go. This is going to force these big oil guys to just knuckle under, throw all concerns about security to the wind, and just go hard on Venezuela, hard on Alaska, hard on shale. Maybe take over Canada, get gain North Dakota or whatever we're calling it, just
Mhm.
take over. So I mean, is that a scenario that you can imagine, or the other scenario is go hard on nuclear, like t tomorrow, let's get going with a whole new generation of nuclear power. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
If we were going hard on nuclear right now, I would say that this makes a lot more sense to me because they've hinged everything on this idea that we're going to get God in a box. We'll be able to control it magically. This AGI super intelligence is going to say, yeah, we choose America, and Anthropic is obviously we're going to make them win going forward. But the point of the control architecture is you have to have that in place forever. So you might be looking at how much gas do we have because we're running the turbines off of that to make electricity. Where's the power for that coming from? And if we were slapping in small modular nukes right now, hit willy nilly, I'd be like, okay, I see the long term plan. But they're doing it without a thought in the world for where all that power is going to come from. So you probably saw this too, right? This whole idea that we're going to be ruled by the technocrats, right? And this is a map that was put out in 1940. By the way, Elon Musk's grandfather was big into this movement. And it's called the Technate of America, and it includes Greenland, Greenland down to Venezuela, Cuba, So who have we been banging on? Well, we've just banged on Venezuela. We've been banging on Cuba. They're in a complete blackout right now. We've been making overtures for Greenland because now we can sort of control that. And this is a regional district. If this is a district that makes sense, to the Technate people, this is a map from 1940. So I think this is the plan that's been in play for a long time. Now, Trump just came out and said, oh, but between Venezuela and North America, which includes Canada, he said, we're sitting on 63% of the world's oil, So to your Wall Street friends, I knew this question was coming. So I pulled this chart up for you, right? These are proven reserves right now. In the United States has about 3.3%. You got Canada, you got Venezuela. When you add those three up, it comes to about 30% of total reserves in that Technate of America region. But 50% lies in the Gulf because you got Kuwait, UAE, Iraq, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. It's about half. So this is a big prize. We do not have 63% of the world's oil. And by the way, Venezuela, there would be this little tiny pie wedge about like this that's actual pumpable oil. The rest of this, what's called the Orinoco Belt, it's not oil like you would think of it. If you got a clump of it in your hand, you'd think it's closer to asphalt that somebody pulled off of a warm roadway. And it's very, very difficult to extract and process. And so we could get to that eventually, but Canada got itself up to about just under 5 million barrels per day of production, but it took them like 15, 20 years of going after their bitumen oil sands, tens to hundreds of billions of dollars of investment. It's slow. You can get there, but that would be the sort of the same process I would expect for Venezuela. It'd probably take 10, 15 years to get it up to meaningful flows of about 5 million barrels a day, I think. And somebody's got to pay it's going to take a lot of cash to get there. So this whole idea that, we're sitting in the driver's seat, we are just, but very temporarily. So the United States has so much oil coming out of the ground because of the shale plays. The shale plays are now at peak, right? The Bakken is already below its peak, right? Eagle Ford below its peak. The Permian is the only one still growing. It's a beautiful play. Don't get me wrong. It doesn't run out tomorrow. I'm not saying that, but the idea that we're going to get substantially more out of it is now over. We're going to be getting slightly less, maybe a little bit more for a year or two as we bump along, depends on the price of oil. But after that, it's just like a long, slow slide back down towards none. Eventually, 2100, whenever that number comes. But it's this idea that we're going to be in a position to supply the world with oil because we'll just get more to come out of the ground and out of Venezuela. It's completely divorced from actual reality. Spend some time with people who are in the oil business, and they'll tell you what those realities are.
So is it possible? I have an old, actually is a Canadian oil man, and he had this notion, and it did not come true for the old boy. His time ran out, but he believed that Africa, the continent of Africa, has got a bunch of kick-ass oil and gas reserves that we can, if we take out the Middle East, if we get rid of those guys, we can kind of go back to British colonialism in Africa. Do you know anything about that? Does that sound plausible at all?
It's entirely plausible. Africa is a huge continent. I think it's probably been relatively poorly explored at this point in time. The places where we see oil production coming out of Africa, Nigeria, etc., those are coastal deposits because you can just drive by in a boat doing sonic investigations and discover that stuff. Operating within Africa, really tricky because it's a very unstable place to do business. So good chance there's a lot there, but whew, it's oil is a tough business. It's got very finicky, delicate equipment, and so it doesn't do well with political uncertainty. Kinetic war is just a complete disaster. If there's social instability, it really needs oil extraction needs a really stable, legal, political, cultural environment to flourish.
Right, right. And that was his adventures in Africa, hanging out with the sort of local
Yeah.
uh, eminences were quite funny stories. And the perception of the investors was, well, it sounds pretty. He sounds like a fun guy you're hanging, having dinner with in Nigeria or whatever, or Angola or whatever. But I'm not sure if I want to put a bunch of chips on the table for that. So I see your point. Well, okay. So the other kind of fun story to emerge in this, we're sort of back to Sir Francis Drake getting his letter of marque, to attack Spanish shipping. There was a marvelous, let's see if I can find it. I thought it was even if it wasn't true, it was a marvelous piece of narrative writing. I'll find it and I'll put it in the show notes. This guy on Substack has this long analytical essay about how it looks like the US has become a sort of pirate LNG supplier. Like if there's anyone that gets in the way of our LNG business, we just blow it up. So, starting with Nord Stream and then Qatar's fields in the midst of this maelstrom and the Gulf, their fields get blown up. Iran's gas field gets blown up. So there's kind of like only one guy left standing, and it's these LNG guys down on the U.S. Gulf Coast. What do you think about the Sir Francis Drake, pirate model of U.S. naval warfare and geostrategic warfare?
It's undoubtedly part of the equation because we just did this. We rode into Venezuela, offed a few people, seized the leader and his wife, and now we've seemingly stolen all of their oil wealth. Not stolen, strong term, John. It's just $13 billion was procured from selling Venezuelan oil and held in custody for them. Just nobody knows where it is at the moment.
Yeah, it's kind of like Russian sovereign wealth. Just, well, we're just going to take it. Yeah,
Yes.
or I was down in Montenegro a couple of summers ago, and there were all of these Russian super yachts down in the port of Montenegro, and apparently the Montenegrin government said, we're not in the business of stealing private property. The Americans seem to be into that, but we in little Montenegro, we don't steal private property. So the piracy model does seem to be increasingly accepted, sort of normalized. Well, so where does this leave us in terms of U.S. LNG? I mean, one of the great ironies of Nord Stream, the perfidious Russians, they want to take us over, they want to destroy our civilization. But it's the Americans that are screwing the Germans on LNG now. I mean, the Germans, which is the greatest manufacturing economy in the world, they had cheap gas from Chancellor Schröder's deal with Vladimir Putin to build Nord Stream. Now they're buying US LNG that is shipped across the Atlantic, burning LNG the whole way, as though this is some improvement in the whole climate change thing.
No, it's
The
you mentioned
US is screwing Germany, which
oh,
was maybe the
totally.
point all along. That's a topic for another. But the old NATO thing. NATO is to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. And it looks to me like that may be what all of this is about. But anyway, US LNG pirate state. What do you think of that?
So, first off, so I always take it back to fundamentals, which is okay, look, we have a certain amount of demand in this country, and demand is growing, right? Because for whatever reason, climate or whatever, we've decided less coal and we're just putting more and more natural gas into our grid. Our grid is now straining under the groaning weight of all these data centers, and the data centers, when they can't tap into a grid, they just almost invariably they install a gas combine plant to make the electricity on site. Okay, so we have that. That's probably another 6 to 8 billion cubic feet per day of demand by 2030 for all these data centers, assuming the ones that are currently under construction get finished, right? If all the ones that are planned get built, double that number. Um, and so Bloomberg recently put this out, and so this is showing actual total production of gas, and they say it's going to keep rising until 2035, and it tells us kind of from where, right? And so the most important components is this green on top is the Haynesville play, and then the next one, the purple, is Permian gas. But the important point is they say starting in 2028, actually the amount of demand from LNG, from data centers, from electricity is going to exceed supply. And it's going to continue to exceed supply for every year thereafter. Maybe it doesn't look like a lot, but in this game of molecules, you can't have a supply demand mismatch. It causes huge chaos. So what happens? Well, I guess we don't ship all that LNG. We keep it at home. That would be one way to close the gap. How do you do that? Well, somehow you have to pay for the difference. So right now we're paying just about 283 per therm right now for gas in the US. But if you were buying this as LNG, it costs 14 to 20, depending on which region it's being sold to. So what do you do? How do you accomplish that? So we already have a supply demand problem, and that's if and only if these two fields continue to produce as beneficently as is projected. And I got some questions about that. Not the Permian, but I have questions about the Haynesville and others. So we'll see. We'll see if it comes to pass. We have a lot of natural gas in this country, but we don't have unlimited amounts. And by the way, we can clearly see tons of fields that are already past their peaks, right? Just happens. It's a thing. And so what we really ought to be doing as a nation is exactly what China's done. They have a 25-year plan, which is 5 sets of 5-year plans. And in each of those, they talk exactly about where their energy is going to come from, the mix of it. They talk about things like which fields they have are going to be able to produce for how long. It's just normal stuff. We're not doing that. Unless there's some 0 point Area 51 alien energy in the reserve, we are not running an energy strategy right now, and it's going to bite us. And it's already beginning to bite in terms of electricity because, the PJM grid's like straining right now. That serves the whole mid-Atlantic region there because they put so many data centers in. And that's going to cause a lot of troubles going forward. It's part of the reason that my house now runs on solar with battery backup. I'm expecting our grid to get unstable in the coming years because nobody's really thinking this through that I can see.
Well, I mean, the other factor in this is you've got the state of California saying, we're going to build out our grid so that everybody in the state's going to drive an EV. And so, well, where are you guys going to get the power to do that? I mean, where are you going to get the power? Where are you going to get the energy input to build out 28 million EV charging stations? That unto itself is going to require an enormous amount of energy. Well, we can talk about this forever.
Mhm.
This has been such a fun interview, Chris, and let's do a follow-up. Unfortunately, I got to jump on another. I've got a new book out.
Oh, let's hear about it.
So, Mind Viruses, it's about how the world has lost its mind since 2001. With increasing frequency, we're left in a position where we just scratch our heads, thinking, what on earth is the government doing? And how on earth has central authority implanted these lunatic ideas in the minds of we the people, always to the detriment of we the people? It's like the government is driving us insane. We're the losers on it. Those who are well positioned in their relations with central government benefit from it, but we're the losers, and we will be the losers with this self-inflicted energy crisis. It's going to be the construction guy driving his pickup to work in the morning to build somebody's house. He's the one that's going to get screwed.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I can't
anyway,
wait to talk. Well, I need to have you on my show because I got to
okay.
talk about that because to me that is that narrative shaping or mind control. That's the biggest threat we face right now because what did Mark Twain say? It ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. Right? We
Well,
know a
there you
lot of stuff for sure that just ain't so right now, and it's like it's gonna kill us, right? It's like those Californians, like, oh, we'll just build charging stations, and then magic, the electricity just sort of comes out the pipe. Like it's just so divorced from reality. Like when did that happen?
Well, Twain was observing, this kind of robber baron class and their consolidation of power in
Yeah.
Washington. So, yeah, one of my favorite writers. Well, let's get together and talk
All
again.
right, we'll do
Uh,
that.
and in the meantime, be well and stay in touch.
Thank you. Will do.
Okay,
Appreciate it.
bye.
Bye.